So, what is qi?
What is qi? Good question. Qi as in qigong. Qi. You find it in all Chinese language. It sort of refers to energy, basically, doesn't it? What is qi?
Yeah, I tend to think it. I find the term energy a little bit restrictive. I think that if you look at it, it, it's certainly accurate. It's not wrong. Um, but I think that the idea of qi is bigger than that. I think the idea of qi, and I always like this idea of it's any invisible force that creates change can be called qi. So that means that, when you hear the thing about breath is qi, well, yeah, it is. It's an invisible force. It creates change. Wind is qi. Well, yeah, that's true as well. My mum told me only mad people can see the wind, but but you can see it on the ocean.
Yeah.
Um, you know, all of this is invisible force that creates change.
Yeah, the character for chi is in petrol, it's in steam, cars, bicycles, they all have the same character in Chinese. But, it also, by extension, we could think about something like, they say that 95% of the universe is dark matter. So perhaps it's dark matter, perhaps it's, equivalent in quantum science as well. Some sort of all pervading energy you cannot see. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think really to understand it, to understand it from a Western perspective, we limit its potential
Yeah.
because it's a cultural piece within China. And so all the things that we're saying here are sort of accurate reflections of what qi is, but we don't have a word for qi. We just don't have a concept that is that embracing.
No, when I explained to my students, I used to say things like, it's like magnetism, but it's not magnetism. It's like electricity, but it's not electricity. Like nuclear fusion, but it's not nuclear fusion. Like electromagnetics, but it's not electromagnetic. Like electricity, but it's not. You're getting the idea? All of
Yeah,
those and not.
yeah. So yeah, I think when it comes down to it, if you want to give a really quick, clean answer to what is qi, um, I think the standard responsive energy it's quite a good way to look at it. Um, I say I tend to think that some people refer to it as breath. That's a good way to look at it. But I think putting it into this sort of thing of any invisible force that creates change becomes a far nicer holding thing for it. Because magnetism, as you say, invisible force that creates change.
Mm.
All of these things are that. So yeah.
And more and not quite. And that's the lovely thing about it, is that it's that sort of sort of ancient Chinese idea of the Tao energy. The Tao that can be named is not the real Tao. I mean, that's a typical sort of Chinese sort of statement idea. You can point 1,000 arrows at chi, but you can't actually touch or see chi. You can suggest where it is, what it does, but it's never quite. And I like that. It's
Mm.
I like that conundrum.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go and answer the phone, shall I?
Is it chi?
Hang on a sec. Okay, well. This question about what is Gung? It looks like gong. It's pronounced Gung, as in qigong. Um, I think the standard definition is work.
Mhm.
I'm, I'm never a fan of standard definitions. I think quite often standard definitions around sort of the more esoteric arts tend to be created by academics who aren't practitioners of the art. So the subtleties of the description get lost somewhere along the way. Um, for a long time, I thought Gung was mastery. I quite like the idea of mastery, but I actually also quite like the idea of it being a skill. Um,
Yeah, it's all of those, isn't it, as well? And then, of course, when you start to use the word mastery, people start to complain about master and the sort of patriarchal dominance kind of idea, which suddenly gets it all sort of, tied up in something else completely different again. But in a way, there has always been this history of kind of, old Chinese blokes mastering things.
mm. Yeah, and again, I'm not a fan of the hierarchy. I'm not a fan of the idea of there being Qigong masters. I'm certainly not a fan of there being grandmasters. And I'm wondering if the level above that is called great grandmaster. There's just something that doesn't quite fit with the practice to have a hierarchy within it.
Correct.
And I like to debunk it by using the term master, by asking the question of what happened when you mastered riding a bike. You didn't suddenly become the best cyclist in the world. You just became able to use the tool without worrying about how it worked.
And there are some incredibly simple tools that we use, simple tool like La Chi, opening hands, closing your hands. Hey, you've mastered it. There we
That's
are.
it.
And
Already.
that's it. But this is also doesn't appear to be much work involved here either, does it? However, it fits under this idea, this kind of title of Gung.
Yeah, yeah. And then obviously there's this sort of extension of it where you talk about teachers having high levels of Gung Fu. Gung
Kung
Fu
Fu. Yeah.
implies, well, it's the same as Kung Fu, isn't it? Really, it's just pronounced properly. But Gung Fu translates as hard work, but it sort of means attainment.
Higher levels of practice, yeah.
Yeah, and so, although you can become a master of this particular La Chi movement very quickly, to really master it, it's the difference between somebody who's just taken the stabilizers off their bike or somebody who's doing absolutely incredible things in a particular style of cycling. You're still using the same tool. You've just honed your skill to the point that you can do incredible things with it. So, yeah,
No, it works well for me. So Qigong, mastering your energy. That's what we want people to do, is to master their energy.
yeah, or even opening it out into that wider description, mastering these invisible forces that can buffet us around.
Yeah.
You being the master of those instead of those being the master of you, which I think is probably a bigger idea and may not be as accessible, but I think it's probably a better description of what Qigong actually is.
How about mastering the forces of the universe?
Sounds like a Jedi thing.
Correct. That's exactly what it is.
Okay,
Qigong.
we'll stick with that. It's Jedi stuff, so yeah.
Qigong, good for Jedis. So why do we do Qigong? What is the point of the movements? Yeah, okay. So,
Yeah.
I mean, well, in its most basic form, we would do Qigong to stretch the body, to do some exercise. And we all know how good exercise is. Sitting on a couch doing nothing, you're not going to kind of help yourself a great deal. Standing up and stretching your muscles out, that when you wake up first thing in the morning, you can give yourself a good long stretch, and that's the first thing. Your body enforces you to do that, and so by extension of that, it's a good idea. And so I think we do Qigong because we understand that exercise is good for us. The people who don't move end up being a bit sort of arthritic, and the people who do move, let's hope, become bendy and stretchy and more flexible. So I think you do Qigong because you want to get your body moving, but also flexible in body, flexible in mind as well. It gets your mind going, gets you thinking. So I would always recommend doing Qigong to people just for that. Work out for the body, work out for the mind.
Yeah, it's difficult to add to that one, really, isn't it? I think it's quite good at looking at it from the point of view of Qi as well. There was within the One Qi project, which is something that Jeremy and I have been working on for a while now. There was an interview with one person who spoke about using a form called Qi rivers, and I quite like the idea of there are rivers of Qi running through the body. Now, if we sit around, we create blockages in those rivers. We create stagnation. We create places that things aren't flowing well. And similarly, we may create areas that things flow too quickly. And so I think if you look at it from the perspective of Qi, what we're trying to do with the movement is actually even out the flows of energy within the body. But that again, that's probably taking it on to another level. But it's a really nice idea that by actually just using sort of simple movements, we can actually mobilize the whole body and allow Qi to flow freely. And so, yeah, if you've had an experience of Qi, that'll probably make sense. If you've not had an experience of Qi, please ignore everything that I've said and listen to Jeremy.
Well, no, that's not quite the case, is it? I was going to say to you, this question we were thinking about, what is the point of the movement, is kind of it kind of answers exactly what you were saying there as well, or asks exactly what you were saying there. I wanted to sort of delve a bit deeper into it, because now this chi you've spoken of, it's inside me, you're saying, and so yeah, so if anybody's ever had an acupuncture treatment, they know that's what an acupuncturist is treating. But it's not something that's generally accepted in the West, that there's this idea, we know about breath and we know about energy and things like that, but the Chinese paradigm, as you say, has these rivers running all the way through our bodies. And so yeah, so using our Qigong exercises, we can get very, very precise about it, in the same way as an acupuncturist can get into the tiniest wee nooks and crannies to move this energy around. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, just as sort of a basic idea, I think it really holds together. And even, I mean, you mentioned breath, but even using movement with breath, we know that if you just sort of collapse and try to breathe, nothing really works. When you open the body up, when you actually introduce movement, you get far more breath. This is the point of the movement. The breath is Qi, and it allows Qi to flow more freely. It creates more space for it. So yeah, absolutely, it's all in there, and we can pull it apart to well, obviously we can. We teach Qigong.
Yeah.
So yeah,
on its basic level, that sounds about right.
I'd say so. So come along and try some. That's our advice.
Yeah. So why is the mind important?
Yeah.
Do you mind?
I was going to say, this is a minefield, isn't it? But yeah,
very good.
Just a really cheap shot.
I don't mind. There's just no end of potential for jokes with it. But I mean, clearly it requires you to use your mind to actually, come up with these jokes. But does it require you to use your mind to do Qigong?
Yeah, I think absolutely. There's one of the phrases that we see repeated over and over again, which is Yi-Dao, Qi-Dao, where the mind goes, the Qi follows. I think the British equivalent is probably if you put your mind to it. Now, if you think of something that you want to get sorted out, but you don't put your mind to it, it won't get sorted out. If you want to achieve something and you do it without applying yourself to it, it won't happen. And the same is true of Qigong. If you simply want to stand there in silk pajamas and wave your arms and legs about, then that's what you'll achieve. You'll achieve the ability to stand there in silk pajamas and wave your arms and legs about. If you want to actually make a difference with it, you need the mind to get involved.
Yeah.
And whether it's as simple as allowing yourself the ideas that we use within the Zhineng practice, we talk about blue sky, expand into blue sky. There's almost an idea here of you can let go of all the noise in your head. You can just bring space back inside. This is a really clear instruction for the mind, and it's a really powerful tool within the practice. Or maybe you apply your mind more specifically to certain things. I think the mind's hugely important.
Yeah, in the kind of Western paradigm, we're hearing much more about the body-mind connection. We've always had this idea that, the heart is off doing one thing and the mind is off doing another thing. But actually kind of, from Chinese culture, the mind actually isn't even really one of the key organs. They're not even particularly bothered about the kind of the brain, let's say. It's what the mind is doing, which is important. And the mind is kind of resides in Chinese medicine throughout your entire body. It's a total body kind of awareness thing. And so, for them to say, for one to put the idea that you could do something, with your body without using your mind in Chinese medicine is insane. It's kind of, how would you do that? How on earth could you manage? And so, yeah, I mean, it's implicit that it is absolutely key to the whole thing. So yeah, it's about complete alignment, having everything kind of brought together, isn't it? Mind and body as one, and that's what we teach.
Yeah,
theory.
Yeah. I think that probably covers it again in simple terms. But yeah,
Mm.
It's absolutely, the mind has to be involved. If you're just standing there waving your arms and legs about, then that's not really Qigong.
So does the mind lead the body, or does the body lead the mind? That's quite a complex question.
Yeah, and I'm not sure whether this is really a basic or not, but I think it's a really interesting question because, you know, if we have a thought of expanding out into blue sky, is it the thought of expanding out into blue sky that creates the movement, or is it the movement that supports the thought?
Mm.
And in the section that we were talking about, you know, why is the mind so important? This body-mind connection is something that we really need to explore, because which one is in charge? Do they flip?
Mm.
And is there a point at which maybe they work simultaneously? And if they work simultaneously, what is in control? There's these types of questions that come in, but exploring that body-mind connection and saying, what is in charge? You know, when I lift my arm, what is the thought process? Is the thought process, oh, I need to lift my elbow, so these muscles need to do something and these muscles need to do something? Or is it just a thought of my elbows lifting or my wrists rising? These types of questions, I think, are really powerful things because it educates the way that we move.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the speed that a thought moves at, an electrical impulse like that, and the speed that the body moves at, the thoughts are much, much quicker than the body movements could ever be. But if you're moving your body much more slowly, and you know your thoughts, you can yeah, use your thoughts, you can pace your thoughts and calm your mind. You can bring the sort of the movement to the body and the movement in mind into a kind of sort of harmony, I suppose. And then what happens from there as well is that you then get a sort of a feedback loop. So if the mind's leading and the body's following, and then the body is giving feedback back to the mind to you know continue the journey. So the you know what comes first, chicken and egg, is quite a sort of a tricky one, that one. And I suppose you know it also depends on the learning process, doesn't it? And so you know to begin with, you know you're sort of taking information in and you're plowing through it, just you know trying to get the body right. But after a while the body starts to have its own muscle memory and it works, and the mind starts to be able to do different things that will move at different speeds. So yeah, it's an interesting question, but it's also deeply embedded in the learning of qigong, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes back to the piece that you spoke about, which is this body-mind connection.
Mm.
Understanding the body-mind connection means that we then become far more, and I'm going to use the word masterful. I don't know whether it's a real word. Maybe it's skillful. I don't know. Gung. You know, this is the gung that we're talking about.
Mm.
It's the ability for the body and mind to work effortlessly together and understand how each other interact and work. So yeah, absolutely.
And how does a sort of an Olympic athlete get good at you know being an Olympic athlete, if not by doing exactly the same thing? This is exactly what we're talking about: is gaining control of your body.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, except you know in the comfort of your own living room, rather than having to go down to a running track day in and day out.
But then if there are any Olympic athletes out there who want to come and train for this, then please give us a shout.
That's it. Great. Yeah, definitely. Oh, very good.
Okay, so a nice big juicy question here. What is the Qifield? What is this Qifield that you talk about, Jeremy?
Well, we were totally unable to really describe what chi is. So how on earth are we going to describe what the chi field is? So yeah, so we're already at a disadvantage before we even get started. But yeah, the one thing to say about Qifield is that what we do know is that it's a theory that was created by Dr. Pang Ming. There are kind of ideas around it that you know other people have had field theory. Very good book by Lynn McTaggart called The Field. You know, we've been talking about magnetic fields and things like that for a long time. But I think that probably when we're talking in terms of kind of Zhineng Qigong in particular, the Qi field, it's kind of like aligning yourself with all the other people who do Zhineng Qigong. It's about a kind of a mental way of plugging yourself into a wider Zhineng Qigong structure, if you like. And there's sort of implications behind that. You know, there's plenty of kind of theory, scientific theory, that's now beginning to show coherence. And so, yeah, I mean, it's about, bringing coherence. And if you've ever been to, to whoever's listening, if you've ever been to a Qigong class, John and I have, you'll know that, when you stand in a group of people for about, 15, 20 minutes, and you've been working together, that you feel like there's a lovely connection between you. It becomes a sort of cozy feeling. And that sort of coherence that comes about when everybody's brain waves start to kind of align. I mean, that's a sort of a kind of Qigong field, I think. What do you think about when you think of Qifield?
I think that's a brilliant description. I think the idea of coherence. Don't look so shocked. I think the idea of coherence really sort of it does talk about one of the major aspects of the Qifield that we experience. I tend to go back to this idea of Qi, and I tend to go back to the idea of if Qi is an invisible force that creates change. One of the implications there to me is that Qi by itself does nothing. It's the invisible force that creates change. It's, for want of a better word, it's potential. And potential always needs direction. It always needs to have something. It always needs to be driven in a particular way. So the Qifield of a group is about creating that coherence is the information that we put into the Qifield. It creates the potential for that space. In the same way as the Qifield of an individual, it has the information of the individual driving them forward. So if that person is very driven, if they're very positive, that informs their Qifield. If somebody is very negative, if someone's very withdrawn, that informs their Qifield. It talks about the information that is being empowered by an individual or by a group. And so there's a piece there about the coherence that I think it's an important piece about working with people who can actually create the information within the group skillfully, and understanding what that information is. And I think that's a rabbit hole we can dive down for hours. So I'm going to step back from that rabbit hole and then talk about, there's another piece here, which is about the bigger Qifield. When we talk about Hunyuan Qi, entirety Qi, I quite like the idea that if Qi by itself is just pure potential, maybe there is an overarching Qifield that is just potential. It has no direction yet. Maybe we are just occupying the space in this vast potential that exists in the universe without the awareness of how to actually work with it. And this is one of the other underlying principles that we work with within the Zhineng system of Qigong. How can we plug into Hunyuan Qi?
The entirety of it all, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think in a very sort of simple way, the coherence in the class is the really palpable, it's the really powerful, that sense of belonging. It's the thing that really gives you the maximum benefit. But then once you've got through that, there's these bigger ideas of Qifield that we can explore as well.
Totally. There's a kind of feeling of holistic kind of holonic kind of nesting as well. Qifields inside Qifields, like sort of layers of onions almost. When I say layers of onions, I don't really mean that because it's going to sound like dinner. I mean the layers of an onion as opposed to layers of onions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because when we open the Qifield in the space, when we create the coherence, quite often you create the coherence within the group, and then you expand out into this awareness that there's people everywhere in similar practices.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's layers and layers and layers, and it's something we can explore ad infinitum. There you go, chuck a bit of Latin in there, why not?
Very good. And if you'd given me long enough, I'd have turned my layers of onions into another great working image about Qifields, but I'm glad we don't have to do that now.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for stopping at your onions.
So the question, do I need to learn all of the points? It's one of those things that, from a teacher's perspective, it's kind of like saying, or imagine you're, navigating from Brixton to Victoria. Do you need to know all the tube stations en route to get between the two of them? The answer's no, but it's something that you could learn as you go along, and then you'd know where those other places were, generalize information. And so the same is kind of true about, do I need to learn all the points? I think that first of all, the discovery that there are points, that's a starting point. And that comes from, this sort of idea of acupuncture. Where am I going to stick the needle? You have to put it into a point. So there's this kind of idea that we have areas on our body that are higher, higher concentration of energy, something like that, gives us the idea that there are various points on the body. And then Qigong uses those points to sort of, stimulate that energy. And so if in the first place you're prepared to accept that there is energy, in the second place you're prepared to accept that the energy's got points on it, the third place is kind of like Qigong can stimulate that energy. Fourth in the list must then be, yeah, why not learn it? You don't have to know it to get full benefit, but yeah, I mean, it's something that can be of use to you, certainly. What do you say?
Um, I think we've got one of our teachers at the moment who's talking about beautiful traps, and it feels like a beautiful trap.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, in general terms, we know that the way that we relate to the heart, for example, is different to the way we relate to the head. We understand that different parts of the body have different sensations, have different functions, have different sort of importance to us. So yeah, it's a refinement of that. And again, I love the analogy of the underground journey. We haven't got to remember all of the places, but then if you regularly go on an underground train and you know the points, you know which one comes next. It helps you to relax into the process. And through familiarity, you learn the points. Through familiarity, you learn the process. And you can explore the details that sit within each of them. So I think the answer is yes, but it's not yes as in you need to get on and study it. It's yes as in it's important that you learn them through practice. It's more important that you become familiar with them through practice.
But
And
do you see it as a barrier to entry?
oh no, not at all. Actually, I think quite often having read all the books and knowing where all the points are is probably a bigger barrier to entry because
Yeah.
you overthink it. And actually, yeah, you need to have a degree of wide-eyed enthusiasm and curiosity in order to get the most out of practices like Qigong. If you come in with a head full of, well, if I work on this particular point, it's going to have this, and oh, that point's not quite accurate, you're not doing Qigong. What you're doing is you're doing academic study of what somebody else has told you.
Yeah.
So that's not Qigong.
There's another thing though in the beginner's mind is about getting it wrong and feeling that you're potentially doing yourself some damage, or just plain being wrong because you're pointing at the wrong place on your body. What would you say about that?
I think this is why it's important to study with people who understand Qigong,
Hmm.
because I think that on one hand, I don't think any of us get it right. I think that the point at which we consider we get it right is the point at which we stop learning.
Hmm.
I think it's creating the space that is safe to be able to explore in, and working with an experienced, qualified Qigong teacher gives you the space in order to get it wrong in a way that is productive and helpful and non-threatening, and it doesn't damage your ego. It doesn't make you go, oh no, I spent the whole class being told I was stupid. I think this is what's really important. Give yourself the space to explore, give yourself the space to play, and you'll become familiar. And it could be that further down the line, you find out that where you thought Mingmen Palace was is not where Mingmen Palace is. So, at any point, you can actually change your ideas. You can allow the ideas to evolve. You haven't got to get it right straight off.
No, that's exactly it, and I think it is that it's this road to mastery story yet again that we've covered quite a few times. Is that if over a period of time you start to refine your knowledge, then the chances are that from an energy perspective, let's say, you're gaining slightly more, but you're not going to be doing yourself damage in the first place by not getting it right. And so when I first teach people lift you up, port you down, I try and give them sort of a general idea. And what I try to do is I try to use terms that they'll be familiar with alongside the Chinese terms. So for instance, one of our favorite ones is lower dantian, the lower of three dantians, Dantian being a Chinese word for, who knows how it's again translated 27 different ways. Altar, cinnabar field, all sorts of weird things. What does that mean? And so I'll sort of say lower dantian, I'll say, the energy field in your belly, behind your belly button. And so when you sort of start to hear both of those things, you can start to think, oh, there we are, dantian must be behind my belly button. And so you start to sort of pick it up bit by bit, but it's certainly not going to stop you from, actually practicing or getting started. And especially if you think to yourself, oh God, I can't speak Chinese, this is going to be impossible for me. That's definitely not important.
No, absolutely not.
That would have held both of us back.
Yeah, there's nothing more daunting than having a fluent Chinese teacher turn up in your class, isn't there?
That's it. Yeah, so no, I think we're fine with points, aren't we? Points and fields, energy fields inside the body, points around the body. You just pick them up.
Yeah, yeah. Ultimately, surely it's just it's a refinement of the awareness that we develop in the practice.
Correct.
It's something that we learn.
Yeah, it's not a deal breaker by any means.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Is accuracy of movement important? Absolutely, incredibly important.
Yeah,
you'll be thrown out of my class if you can't get your hand into exactly the right posture.
And if you move the little finger just a little bit too much, you'll die.
That's it.
Okay,
so as with everything in Chinese, the answer is both no and yes. No, as in, it's not a barrier to entry, and yes, as you get better at it, it's nice to to be able to see the form and understand it, and then no again afterwards. Because having sort of built up the whole sort of thing, then you have to kind of like forget all about it and just become chi.
Yeah, I think accuracy is important, but it's not important. It's important for two reasons to me. And one is, if you're teaching it, you need to be as accurate as you can, because people copy you. It's natural. If you walk into your first Qigong class, you're going to look at the person practicing and you're going to copy their movement. And if they're doing this, then that's going to be the movement that you copy. These stories of people looking at students and going, I know who you studied with, because you've got exactly the same problem as the teacher. So yeah, if you're teaching, accuracy is vastly important. And the other place that I think it's important is when you want to really refine your understanding of the practice.
Okay.
I think it's important to explore the accuracy in that situation, because it means that you're actually allowing yourself to open up specific parts of the body. You're allowing yourself to explore the finer detail of what's going on. But if, when you first come into a class and you want to explore the accuracy of the practice, it's a bit like telling somebody they've got to understand the finer points of a fuel injection system before they can drive a car. No, no. Get on and do the practice. See how it feels. See how it works for you. See how your body works, and then start to refine it. And that process of refinement it's just well, for me, it's a glorious journey. I think the same is true for yourself as well, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. But do we have to talk about the beautiful trap of the importance of refinement? And do we have to talk about Tai Chi? Sorry, excuse me.
Oh, you went there. And actually, no, I want to slap you on the wrist for that one, because it's more about competitive versions of the sport.
Yeah.
And sport is it's the term here. People get judged on how good their practice looks.
Yeah.
What's that about?
I know, it's like a dressage pony.
Yeah.
Have you got your little hooves in exactly the right place? But yes, so that's kind of what I was meaning about no, it's not important, because when you get started, you just need to get started. Yes, it is important, because you then need to refine it to understand it and get the sort of the you know, the deeper meaning out of it, and then no, it's not important again as you go beyond that deeper meaning, and you find, you know, you soften into a much more kind of, I don't know, universal practice where form no longer matters. And it just reminds me of one of our great friends who lives in China, who's a teacher, whose form has now dissolved almost entirely. You can't quite tell what he's doing ever, but when you look at him, you know that he's gone deeper than, you know, most people ever go. And so yes, his form is just completely dissolved, really.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny that, isn't it? So it's a really phased question. That is the form important? It
Yeah,
depends where you are on that kind of cycle, I suppose, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah. I think the answer has to be yes, but it isn't the, unless you want to get involved in competitions and sort of, unfortunately, there are no black belts in Qigong. You know, we
I've
don't
got
even
one.
have, have you? I
I made it for myself.
was going to say, we don't even have different colored uniforms for different levels of attainment. No, it's, um,
Think about that.
so no, I think that it's, again, it's a trap. And we need to recognize the benefit of anything that we do. We need to recognize the benefit of it and then hold it accordingly. And so, yeah, it's important, but it's not important when you start. It's not important when you get beyond a certain place. It's important in the exploration, and it's important in the sharing.